me with just all these crazy changes. I'm like, blue suns, just not being able to see stars, meteorites falling, earth cracks, fissures. Oh, it is going to be a doozy.
New studies show that by the time people reach their middle ages, the body often produces less than half of the collagen it did in their youth. Collagen is the main building block in our skin, making up 70 to 80% of it. This is why we get sagging skin and wrinkles as we age. If you want to look younger, you must supplement collagen, which will improve your skin's elasticity, make it smoother, more plump, and more youthful looking. That's why Ageless Multi-Collagen provides 5 key types of collagen you need from 4 different sources, essential to optimally support an array of full-body benefits. No odor, no taste, no clumping, unlike other collagen supplements. And this is why I recommend Health with Adapt 2030. Ageless Multi-Collagen, and look at that, I need another bag already. Quick way for youthful appearance. Use the link in the description box below for 51% off my favorite Ageless Multi-Collagen. And now on with the video.
Another edition of Trad Cat Night special guest exclusive podcast right here on the tradcatnight.org website. I hope you all are having a very wonderful and blessed day. And on today's program, David DuByne from Adapt 2030 is joining the show yet again. And he, of course, is keeping his eyes on the latest in regards to Earth changes. And David and I think this is going to be like our 3rd or 4th show. We are going to be getting through some of the latest. We want to talk the latest with the Earth's magnetic field. David, thank you so much for joining the program yet again. Where should we begin? So much, of course, happening since the last time we talked. Increase in volcanic activity, all kinds of insane earthquakes. But there's a lot to keep up with on the Earth changes level. Now, in regards to, we mentioned the volcanoes there, they're popping off all over the place. One we failed to mention, tons of earthquakes happening in Iceland. Taro the other day was pointed to, pay attention to the volcanoes out there in the Icelandic area too. So it's all over the place. Now you've got a video here, already got 25,000 views, 750-year eruption cycle. What's that based upon? How did you come up with a 750-year number? What does that involve? Is that all volcanoes? Is that just certain volcanoes in a certain area? What does this mean?
Well, that was the Krýsuvík volcano that you just talked about. So in Iceland, if you go back through history, Katla is another one that erupted in the 1700s that sent sort of a half a year without a summer. So if we look at Iceland, there's an enormous amount of activity from that particular area that has affected our planet's ability to grow agriculture through the last, say, 6,000 years. That has really caused some massive famines through, if you go back. And I'll even stretch and say 8,000 years. But a lot of those have been pinpointed to this area. And, like Terrell was doing, I was just looking to see what kind of volcanic activity was there. And if we get a VEI 6 or 5, I'm going to say, I'll go up and say a VEI 6 out of Iceland. And I say this, and I really mean what I say when I say this. You need to drop whatever you are doing at that point that you hear it on the news. And you need to go to the hardware store and buy as much plastic as you can, plastic sheeting. You want to go get what they call cattle panel. You want to get any kind of wiring so you can make your own greenhouses and have a hoop over it to make your own hoop houses. You're going to buy as much stuff as you can to create a greenhouse, because at that point, that's going to be the only way to protect the food. And at the same time, while you're buying all that, you're going to want to buy an enormous amount of extra stored food, seeds, and just empty your bank account to the last cent to get ready, because once one of these goes off in Iceland, our world is going to be changed forever. The food production will fall out not even the next year, the very next season. So we're going to go into a global famine at that point within just months, not years, because the interconnectivity of the systems, and they're not going to be able to redivert enough food, and people will hoard it anyway. And that's the whole premise of looking into this. And what was so strange about that whole Icelandic eruption is Krýsuvík only erupted back in 1108 and 1340. It's been silent since then, and suddenly it turns back on right now which was expected with more volcanoes in the grand solar minimum, but we got the magnetic field wandering. But then I started doing more research into this, and the collapse of dynasties and kingdoms across our planet in the northern hemisphere during that 1108 eruption, staggering. And also there's so many books written about this. The moon disappeared for months and months and months and months, and the moon, even at full moon, it just disappeared. That was from the opacity of all the sulfur dioxide in the air that didn't allow that wavelength of light to penetrate for the Earth. So we lost the moon for months. That was that same eruption straight out of Iceland, that same volcano that just woke up after almost 800 years right now.
Wow.
And the collapse of the Toltecs and the collapse of the Song dynasty. And it didn't matter what continent it was. That's the strangest thing. In North America, the collapse, and you can go through and see the central Mississippi peoples all the way over. And it had a significant effect. And it just woke up again. It's kind of scary, to even think about that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because Catholic prophecy indicates that the moon will hardly be able to be seen. The stars will become very dim, very feeblish. And I always kind of wondered how could that occur? I mean, I think what you're talking about with this volcano popping up, I think that very much fits the equation. Now, another area too on the prophecy side of things, I wanted to throw out to you because I know you're a prophecy buff, because you were talking about earth fissures and cracks somewhere on your YouTube. You're putting out so much information, it's hard to keep up with you. It's good on your side there, David. But here's one from Sister Gianna, the Nativities back in the 1700s, and she very much spoke to our times. But she did make mention of all kinds of earth changes, one of which is in regards to these earth cracks. She says this, as well as I see that the earth will be shaken in all different kinds of places by frightful earthquakes, I see the whole mountains cracking and splitting with a terrible din. Only too happy will be one if they can escape with no more than a fright. But no, I see out of the gaping mountains whirlwinds of smoke, fire, sulfur, and tar, which will reduce nearby towns to cinders. And I've always documented this because I've seen on other, earth changes outlets in various places, Latin America. There's one article here from Chimborazo, Ecuador. This was dated, 5+ years or so ago. They have got all kinds of earth cracks and fissures there with the sulfur coming out and whatnot. And they're just kind of looking around like, what's going on here? Well, I could tell you what's going on. You might want to get out of town here soon, but talk to us on that level with the earth cracks and fissures. I know, what is it, Africa is splitting into two. I know running up and down the Mississippi too, there's a pretty big fissure running, and perhaps that ties in with the whole Scalian map eventually, with that just kind of all opening up and turning to water. I don't know. So much happening, too many variables, David. But what do you think with some of the latest we're seeing with the earth cracks?
Yeah, it's like a Rubik's Cube trying to put it all together. It really is, while you're juggling with the blindfold on to figure it all out. So I start back in history, and that's the new Madrid Fault zone you're talking about. And a lot of people who might or might not have heard about this quake, it was the largest in the eastern part of the United States in the last 200 years. That was so strong that it was ringing church bells clear up in Boston. But you're talking about something that was clear down Missouri, way south on the Mississippi River. The most interesting thing was sand volcanoes came out. They deformed about 10 million acres of farmland at that point. Now, this is in the early 1800s, so it's not into these hundreds and hundreds of millions of acres that we have between Canada and the United States now down into Mexico that we farm with. It was just that whole area, which was the main cleared areas to do substantial farming in the 1800s in the United States. They had these sand volcanoes that came out, and it took them decades to flatten it back out again to make some of these farm field areas usable again. The sand volcanoes were also coming out in the forests too. The whole area itself, the mapped area of the sand fissures was 10 million acres. Now that included a lot of farmland, and they even showed new stream beds forming, and some of what you might consider hills in those areas were the areas where they just didn't do anything with the sand volcanoes because it was in a forested area, and now it becomes a hill itself. So some of the images that were coming out, these sand volcanoes were anywhere from 40 to 70 feet tall. It was something very much similar to that. There were earth cracks. Now, when you're talking about an earth crack, that's very different from a full-on volcanic eruption. What you're talking about is more an earth crack where water will ooze out like a mud flood. So a lot of people really into the mud flood research area on how and why buildings are partially buried and have been through antiquity. They go through these cycles of, well, they'll find excavations in buildings and the first floor will be buried in mud. So they just cut doors into the second floor because they couldn't excavate the first floor. This lends a lot of credence to that. During these times, it seems to be about every 400 years or some light versions in the 200-year range. It could be some select locations. But in earnest, about every 400 years, there's some sort of ripping of the crust that oozes out mud, water, sand, and this type of thing. And for those of you who are thinking like, well, how could there be water in the crust? There's 3 times more water in the crust of our planet than all of the oceans, rivers, and lakes on the surface combined. So when you hear about primary water sources and the Nubian Aquifer, that's something like 10,000 cubic kilometers of water over the Arabian Peninsula area, stretching up all the way through North Africa there. Libya tapped that and was doing a lot of agriculture with it. There's an enormous amount of water in the crust. So if the top mile of the crust ripped and water oozed out, can you imagine how much possibility there would be? And that goes into the biblical Noah flood accounts too, where water was shooting up from the earth thousands and thousands of feet, if not even higher. It was in the crust. And I believe that this electromagnetic effect, we're going to be seeing some things that you really can't possibly understand or comprehend in our modern world because it's been so stable for so long and our history is written about stability, not these earth changes. So when we see these things, it's going to be so far off the ability for people to understand what they're seeing. They're literally going to freeze in their tracks because it's going to make no sense. And it's going to be so far off the charts, it's not even going to be a thing that can be possibly registered as an event of possibility in their minds.
Yeah. Even scientists are stunned by some of the things that we're seeing happening on the earth changes level. They just kind of step back and they're like, well, I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. That's never a good sign. Now, to circle back to the mental to circle back to the mental effects or mental changes as in relation to comets. This is a question or topic I've been asking Gil and others, and I believe we may have talked about it a little bit, but let's pick back up on this conversation because there's one Catholic prophecy that's always stood out to me. Blessed Kenori, who also spoke about the 3 days of darkness, but just people losing it, man. People on edge. And I'll just read the prophecy and I'll let you pick up to what you were saying in your video from this past month in regards to mental changes on people and just in general with the environment, animals, I mean, at all. She says, the sky took on a morbid blue color. It terrified everyone. A dark wind blew everywhere. An impassioned and mournful shrieking filled the air, hence all those like strange sounds that we're hearing. So like I throw my hands up, I'm like, okay, is this the electromagnetosphere breaking down? Is this like a comet, inbound that our Earth can't handle? I don't know. She says, like a terrible roar of a fierce lion, it resounded over the whole Earth in blood-curdling echoes. Then all men and animals brimmed with terror, and the entire world convulsed, and then everyone pitilessly slaughtered one another. That is not something you want to wake up to and eat while you're eating Cheerios, David. But I can see how it's kind of all coming together. Break that down for us a little bit more, the mental effects and just effects on life itself, animals, human beings.
Yeah, that'd be a complete frequency reset where everything would scatter in the brain and the base frequency would reset to something different. And those that couldn't handle the upgrade in frequency would absolutely go insane. Now, whatever form that takes in mental imagery in their minds, hard to know. But you got to think about the cosmic ray bombardment. There was this article about a cardinal that are usually red, but there was a half male, half female cardinal where it was red and then the regular duller sort of brown colors from the female. It was a perfectly split cardinal. It was half red, half brown. Strange. And we're starting to see a lot of things genetically that are morphing at the moment. Everywhere you look across the blogosphere, there's always like morphed animals that don't make sense kind of things now. And I'm not talking about 6 toes. I'm really talking about a new species morphing out of something from cosmic ray bombardment. And then, the whole electromagnetic thing, our brains are set for a certain tuning, if you will. And the right and the left half of your brain are also very much like small Earths. They have an electromagnetic center about them as well. So if that were to go off kilter, like the sun stepping down, or Earth would step down, the magnetosphere, but then what's happening electrically in your brains that are also north-south, if you will, it's getting affected. So lack of sleep or sleep problems would probably be one, because your brain wouldn't function to ever be able to step down into an off position like you normally would do when you sleep soundly, because the electromagnetic fields would be interfering or try to reassemble themselves, or it's like trying to play with 2 magnets and move them in different places all around the magnet. You're going to get different places that snap together and try to keep it stable apart, but it just slipped together again. If the Earth did a great shudder, that might mean it stopped in rotation for a minute and then started re-rotating. Now, at that point, again, the base frequency would have shifted, and people would absolutely lose their minds. They would absolutely lose their minds, because in history, if you go back to China, we're talking about 2300 BC. The Chinese talk about the Earth stopping for 3 whole days and then re-rotating again. So it's been through our recorded history that this event has happened once before. These tidal waves to and fro, this has all been recorded within the last 5,000 years on our planet by so many cultures. Now, this is not the Great Flood. That's something different. But when the Earth's stopping and the sun stands in the same position for 18 hours and it doesn't move.
Yeah, I've got videos on that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So this is a real recording and a real story passed down from whatever culture, society, race of people it is that said, we witnessed this event and this is what we're telling you happened. So that would be a great shaking to and fro that would definitely shudder the entire planet. Imagine if it stops, and the slowdown anyway would freak people out. The blue color is referenced in John Casey's book, Dark Winter. No, sorry, that was the revamp of Cold Sun. If you go to his very, very first publication, Cold Sun, I think he left us a clue there, because on the very front of the book cover, it's in the blue wavelength of the angstroms when you're looking at the sun. Perhaps he's telling us the sun turned yellow into white. Perhaps the next step is going to be blue, which matches up with your prophecies. But he also knew that the step down was going to turn the sun bluish tinge. How would humans react to a blue sun? The color filtration would be different anyway. So in the prophecies, if you hear about things changing color or everything being a different color, like imagine instead of having a white or a yellow light blowing on something, like tungsten bulbs are terrible if you're going to do filming, like all the colors change. That would definitely be a reference to something in a prophecy of a color change across objects and things. The land turn incredibly purple. Well, most times it won't turn a huge indigo color, because it's not normally in our spectrum except a deep sunset. But if you're coming in with like a blue light versus a white light or a yellow light, it's very possible.
I mean, just all these crazy changes. I'm like, blue suns, just not being able to see stars, meteorites falling, earth cracks, fissures. Oh, it is going to be a doozy.